Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of 1 in 8. I got some really great questions from you guys, and I really want to cover on a lot of topics that I tried my best to answer. But one of the main ones that I totally wanted to get into right away was about biopsy. I have so many patients emailing into me all the time when I'm sending update emails. Hey, my plan was to freeze on day 5. Why did you freeze my embryos on day 6? I just want to make sure everybody understands the process of biopsy and what defines a blastocyst. So not everybody, due to popular belief, creates blastocysts on day 5. I want to say our clinic specializes in a lot of patients 38 and up. That's like the biggest pool of patients we have here. So for us, our blastocysts don't, I'm going to say like 95%, maybe more, of our patients don't make blastocysts until day 6. And if they do make blastocysts on day 5, we are big believers in the fact that we don't want to touch those blastocysts until they have a good cell number. The more cells, the better chance of a viable pregnancy. So even if you do have a blast on day 5, we like to push it to day 6 unless we see enough cells. So when you're talking about embryo grading on day 5 and day 6, there's only 2 things that you should be concerned with. How the ICM looks. So the ICM is a clump of cells in the middle of an embryo. Not always the middle, sometimes on the side. So I'm going to show you. An ICM, like this one right here, is a big clump of cells called the inner cell mass. Those cells are what become a potential fetus. All of these cells on the outside hatching out of the shell right now are trophectoderm cells. They're also made up on the inside as well. Hundreds of cells, not able to count them, not important. If you can count trophectoderm cells, it is not a good embryo. So ideally, you want it to have the maximum amount of cells. So the trophectoderm cells, which potentially become the placenta, are what we take for biopsy. So I'm going to show you a video of how biopsy is done. I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that it is perfectly normal to have a blastocyst on day 5 or day 6, and some centers even on day 7. There's nothing wrong with it. A viable blastocyst can be frozen on any 3 of those days. The pregnancy rate may be slightly lower on a day 7 embryo, but we've had pregnancies here from day 7 embryos. So it's not standard protocol for us to keep till day 7, but if we're checking on day 6 and we think it has potential and that it's not there yet, but it maybe needs some more time, especially in egg thaw cases, we see this all the time, we will keep it another day. And that's not something most labs do. Some labs throw them away on day 6 and think that if it can't make a blastocyst by day 6, it's not going to be a baby. We don't have that culture here at GNF, but I want to show you the video biopsy so that you guys have a better understanding of how the process works. So we are going to take cells from the trophectoderm and send those cells out for PGT testing, genetic testing. We do not take cells from the inner cell mass, only the trophectoderm, because they're riddled with stem cells and they regenerate and recover from this biopsy. No more than, like, if you look at them an hour later, the embryo doesn't even look like we biopsied it anymore. So the embryo will collapse during biopsy because you have to remember the blastocele is filled with liquid. So as soon as we start cutting those cells out with the laser, which is FDA approved and safe, we would never harm your embryo. We take between 4 to 6 cells, all that liquid comes rushing out. So think of it like a balloon. It's gonna collapse, and then we don't want it to fully recover. We do want to see it expand a little bit before we freeze it. It's a good sign to see the embryo react and revert back to how it's supposed to. We don't want it to completely re-expand. The process of freezing and thawing, you want to take all that liquid out of the embryo because the process of thawing, it could potentially cause ice crystals and then cell damage during the thaw process. So that is the main reason why we like to collapse embryos before freezing. So let's take a quick peek at this biopsy that I recorded. And then if you guys have questions, please comment below. But please keep in mind that all biopsy techniques are completely different and no one is going to be harming your embryo. We wouldn't be doing this if we thought it was potentially hurting the embryo. Let's watch. So here we go. I also want you to keep in mind that we hatch these embryos. So if somebody's signed up to do PGG testing, we do hatch them. So here is the zona, right? All these cells right here. So on this shell right here, the zona pellucida is the shell of the embryo. This embryo naturally needs to hatch out of its shell in order to implant on your uterine wall. So you want it to be hatching when you transfer it. So by doing assisted hatching, we aid that embryo, and these cells are super sticky. We help the embryo, attach. It does improve pregnancy rate. So many people are afraid of doing assisted hatching, and I'm telling you, it does nothing but benefit your embryo. Oops, sorry guys. So sometimes it takes a minute, probably just setting up my needles at this point. So here comes the holding needle, which is, this all uses air suction to hold your embryo, and this is all done microscopically. So I'm holding the embryo with the holding pipette, and down comes my biopsy needle on this side. So now I'm gonna position it. I wanna have good suction here so that when I start pulling on this side, the cells break off easy, and I'm not gonna cause any damage to the actual embryo. I don't have to go in, and some people don't believe in assisted hatching, so they actually make a hole themselves and go in and suck these cells out. But not necessary if you just hatch them. So here I'm taking, I take a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and use the laser at this point to make an incision right here. As you can see, the embryo is starting to collapse, so all that water is rushing out because I'm making some holes right now to get the embryo cells to break off. We want between 4 to 6 cells to get a successful result. So the more cells, the better, but you don't want to take too much. So I'll do my first hit, and then biopsy is really a game of tug of war, is what I tell everybody. We want to keep hitting with the laser on the cell junctions that we have already cut, to minimize damage at this point of any extra cells. Like I said, the embryo is going to recover from this, but I don't want to cause any excess damage, right? So I'm going to keep cutting on those same gap junctions that I started with. And that's the general technique that we practice here. So again, it's a game of tug and pull. So I'm applying pressure over here, and I'm applying suction over here, so that it's not only just the laser that's cutting the cells, but it's the actual friction from actually pulling these cells off. Is the safest way that we go about this biopsy. So as you can see, the junctions are coming, they're getting pretty big. So at this point, I'm also using a very low setting on my laser. If I use a higher one, it probably would cut a lot quicker, but I prefer to take it slow because I don't want to apply so much pressure where I'm going to lose the cells that I'm sucking up right now. Because if they shoot into my there we go, broken, right? If they shoot up into my pipette and I try to release those cells and they come out too fast, they're just going to break up, and then there go my biopsy samples, and I'm going to have to go back and re-biopsy this embryo because I already lost my cells. So having control suction-wise, there are my cells that I'm going to be sending out for a biopsy, and the actual embryo is going to get frozen. We like to give it at least a half hour to recover, but in reality, probably around 15 to 20 minutes. You can see in most cases an embryo react and re-expand and start recovering from this biopsy. It's really cool. Biopsies are not always that easy. Sometimes you just have sticky cells, or cells that are just, I'm pulling and they're just breaking up, and you have to send a good sample out for testing. So in those cases, sometimes I'll just say I don't want to take too much of the embryo, so I'm not gonna try to take more samples from it. Biopsy is just so temperamental and has so much to do with the technique of the senior performing it, and the tools they have to work with it. I mean, if you don't have a good laser, it's going to take more hits to cut the cells. Just so much that goes into it. So I would love to hear feedback from you guys. That was a really great example of a blastocyst. They all don't always look that beautiful, but if the cell number is there and it's not a dying embryo with degeneration inside of it, you know, we're gonna biopsy it because we need to give, you know, and we know for sure that it's gonna survive a freeze and a thaw based on cell number. We're gonna give it a chance. We don't just throw embryos away. If we don't think that the embryo is suitable for biopsy, but it has potential, we just wanna freeze it. We go ahead and call the patient and let them know that. We're very transparent here, and that's why I love this lab so much. You don't have that flexibility everywhere, and you don't always know what's going on with your embryos everywhere else. So I hope that this helps clarify a little bit what actually goes on. Like I said, those little cells got loaded into these little PCR tubes. They remain frozen. We ship them out to the biopsy company, and the embryo gets frozen and kept on site until we get those PGT results back and you decide what you want to do with the embryos.